In 2010, the Arab Spring, a series of protests erupted in Tunisia and spread to other countries such as Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. These protests started peaceful but escalated to armed conflict, especially in Syria, sparking the ongoing civil and proxy war and leading to the largest exodus of the 21st century, with endless convoys of Syrian families seeking refuge from the brutal war. As the United States started taking in refugees, NGOs and religious institutions stepped in to help with the resettlement process. And as a member of a local mosque, Board of Education, and with my academic background, I was invited by the Imam, the religious leader, to start literacy programs for Syrian refugee men and women. We started the program, which we named RESLA, short for Refugee English as a Second Language Adult. And we decided to choose that name because it sounds like the word Risala, which is a typed or written letter sent by mail. And this word has the communication and also literacy connotation. So we decided to choose that name, especially since refugees are always anxious to stay in touch with loved ones, to tell them about the intimate details of their lives. Once classes were ready to start, unfortunately, all of the Syrian men dropped out, and 10 of the 15 women decided to attend, but even the women's class had its own issues, with retention being one of them. Honestly, it was disheartening, it was depressing, considering the amount of effort we have put to start the program, and also seeing the lack of interest in learning the English language from this community. However, this became the impetus for my research, especially with this community, and understanding the decisions that especially Syrian refugee women take as they come to the United States, as they live in the diaspora. So reflecting back on my journey with this program, and reflecting even on my positionality as a researcher and academic, I felt like I approached the program from the Western lens, from the Savior lens, deciding what is best for this community to achieve economic, cultural, and even linguistic mobility, especially when it comes to women. And at the same time, I saw that Syrian refugee women's literacy practices are influenced by cultural and societal factors. And with that approach, I felt I ignored the richness of literacies Syrian refugee women bring to this country, and which advance the literacy landscape of this country. So I had to step back, I have to evaluate myself and see how I depicted or even viewed refugee women, transcending images of victimization and trying to see who they are as agents, as having voice, and they are capable of making decisions on their own. So as I started working with refugee women, I decided to focus, as I said, on them, on their decision making, and on the choices that they make as they construct a Syrian home in the diaspora. So I started seeing what literacies they bring in this country, rural and food literacies, especially since most of the Syrian refugees I'm working with come from rural areas or from agrarian areas, and especially since these women are considered kind of illiterate, even when they were in Syria, and they are considered to be unproductive and dependent on their male relatives. These women, as I said, coming from rural areas, they were taught by their families that a woman should be the best housewife or mother one can be. So they were taught domestic skills, and they were taught to be excellent in these domestic spaces while supporting their male relatives. These women were seen as kind of dependent, as submissive, as unproductive. However, what these women did, they took these skills, embodied these skills, relived the skills, especially in the diaspora, and become productive. And what I mean by that is when refugees come to the United States, they are given about 8 months to become what they call self-sufficient and independent, and they should be productive, they should be financially independent. Now the law has changed, and now it's 12 months. But even with 12 months, and especially those who come from rural areas, and especially with women, they do not have education in Arabic, and even when their husbands, even if they have education in Arabic, they do not have the degrees, they are not able to become or to have a decent job and become productive. That's why women had to rely on their domestic skills and extend the domestic role into public spaces. For instance, Mustafa is one of the Syrian refugee women I'm working with. She evaluated her situation, and she decided what the struggles are and what the tools are to find ways to become productive. So she extended, as I said, her maternal roles, her domestic skills, and started a small business selling Syrian food and Syrian authentic food. And when she was in Syria, her family did not have access to like basic amenities such as clean water or electricity. But even with that, they were taught to produce the best food possible, like using organic ways, using natural ways, and the food can survive regardless of what the temperature is. Using these ways, she, as I said, started a small business and she became productive. These kind of narratives, especially Mustafa's narrative and other Syrian refugee women who kind of adopted the same approach, started their businesses, they defy the dominant narrative that women, especially women who come from rural areas, are unproductive. And now they are showing their agency, they show their autonomy, and they show even their independence. Even with Mustafa, she is kind of like in charge. Her husband buys the materials for her, he packs her products, and even delivers her products to her customers. And at the same time, her son does bookkeeping on a small scale, and also he does social media because he knows more English than both his parents. As an immigrant Syrian woman myself, I lived in Syria up to high school age, and I lived in the suburbs of Damascus. Also, I was taught domestic skills, which I cherish and also embody in, like while living here in the United States. Having this knowledge, having this background allowed me to connect with these women. As we were discussing, natural ways to produce authentic food, such as jams, pickles, fatayers, different kinds of sweets. So this kind of opened the door for us to find, as I said, ways to connect and communicate. At the same time, since I speak the same language, I speak the Syrian dialect, I know about the culture, so we know the struggle of starting a Syrian home, especially in the diaspora. So these women became like very comfortable with me discussing the most intimate details of their lives. And they reflected about their time in Syria when they experienced the war. For instance, Mustafa explained how when the town was under siege, women had to bear the brunt of the war. They had to find resources, especially there was lack of or shortage of food and water, and they had to find ways to feed their families and feed the community. What Mustafa said and what she did is, with the community, with the women, they would get together, they would use the corn cobs, which they usually give to livestock. They would cut them in half, they would dry them, and then they would use the manual grinder to make kind of flour. They would use this kind of flour, kneading the flour and making bread, and at the same time, they use salt to produce Syrian cheese, labneh, all of that to feed their families. So for them, salt became kind of like a source of sustenance, feeding their families, preserving every source of food, and also healing them in every way possible, figuratively keeping the community together and keeping the family together. So as you can see, women are agentic. They are able to survive, even to support their families during wars and also coming into the diaspora. And what happened is NGOs like Mosaic, which is part of the DMV area, took the same kind of idea. And they created programs or even projects like Safartas. And what Safartas means in Arabic, especially in Syrian culture, is a multi-layer tiffin, which is used to deliver hot lunches to farmers. Taking the same approach, taking the same ideas, Mosaic sponsored the food that is produced by women and is sent to customers as a kind of a lunchbox, which Americans found to be kind of appealing and attractive, and which at the same time allowed for the merging of cultures, merging of different types of literacies, and this is also because of women, especially Syrian refugee women, and especially refugee women who come from rural areas, who, as I said, are always seen as submissive and agentless or have no place at the table. So as we can see, Syrian refugee women are able and they are independent, they're able to make choices, they are deciding what is best for them to live in this country, sustain their family, and even advance. What they did and they continue to do is to advance, to allow for the Syrian culture to have place and even integrate with the American culture, allowing for different types of education and even literacies to expand and even flourish in this country. So they are, as I said, agents which kind of defy the dominant narrative that is always attached, or the image that's attached to these women. And learning English for them does not have to be the means of success. They are being successful through the literacies that they learned and they adopt in this country, so which kind of shows the agency and the autonomy Syrian refugee women deserve. Thank you.